It was supposed to be just another routine shift at the morgue. Nothing special. Just another set of bodies to process. Another night of cold steel tables and the smell of antiseptic. The morgue was a place of stillness, and I had grown accustomed to the late night hours that most people avoided. The whispers of death and the haunting quiet were all part of the job. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. But the call came in, and the moment I heard the name, everything changed. Prince, the one and only. You know the name, a musical genius, a legend. His presence electrified a room. To most people, he was a god. To me, he was just another name to add to the list of celebrities whose bodies would eventually end up on my table. At least that's what I thought. But even as I processed the name, a chill ran down my spine. I wasn't prepared for what was about to happen. Prince's body had been confirmed dead earlier that day, and now it was being brought in. No fanfare, no grand ceremony, just another body arriving at the morgue. Or so I thought. The team started to get a bit more serious than usual when they told me to prepare for it. But even then, it didn't hit me that this was Prince. His death had barely sunk in. Celebrities die all the time, but it doesn't make it any easier. It just feels unreal. I stood there, trying to shake the unease that had settled in my gut. Maybe it was because of his status. Maybe it was because of the way that others in the room started moving with a kind of reverence that I couldn't quite place. I noticed the way the team handled the arrangements. More careful, more deliberate, moving with precision, but also with hushed awe. They weren't talking as much. It was almost as if they were afraid to disturb something, someone, too sacred. I remember thinking, it's just a body. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. There was an unspoken air about the entire situation that felt off. This wasn't just another celebrity passing. It couldn't be. Prince was different. He wasn't like the others whose stories were known, but who remained just regular people in death. Number. Prince was more than that, and as the moments passed, I realized the difference wasn't just in the name, it was in the energy. The room felt charged with something strange. As I checked the equipment, I caught glimpses of the other workers in the morgue. They were more serious, more on edge than I'd ever seen them. They weren't talking much, and when they did, their voices seemed to carry more weight than usual. It was unsettling. I couldn't help but wonder why this felt so different from all the other times we'd received bodies. And then it came. The unmistakable hum of the gurney wheels, slowly rolling toward the door. It was like time itself slowed down for a moment. When they finally wheeled him in, I saw it clearly. The body was covered. A thick cloth draped over it like a shield, as if to hide the truth from the rest of us. And that's when it hit me. The way they moved, the careful hands, the way no one dared speak a word above a whisper. They were treating this body with a kind of reverence, a sort of fear. I told myself it was just the usual respect for the deceased. But even then, I knew it wasn't. There was something else. Something bigger was at play. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. The team went through the usual motions, prepping the room, gathering the tools. But I couldn't stop staring at the body beneath the cloth. It was as though it was staring back at me, even though I knew it couldn't. There was something magnetic about Prince, something about his presence that I had only ever seen from a distance. The music, the mystique, The aura that surrounded him, it wasn't something that just disappeared after death. It felt as if he was still there, watching. But it wasn't just awe that I felt in that moment. It was dread. The sense that I was about to see something I wasn't supposed to see. Something that would change everything. The room fell into a strange silence. I could hear the shuffle of feet, the soft whispers between the team members, but they weren't saying anything of substance. And then, as the body was carefully placed on the cold steel table, everything went still. The sound of breathing seemed louder. The fluorescent lights above buzzed in the background, but it felt like the whole world was holding its breath. No one spoke. No one moved. I glanced around the room and saw the faces of the others. They weren't just anxious. They were terrified. That's when I realized it wasn't just my nerves at play here. Something was wrong. Something wasn't just off with the body. Something was wrong with the entire situation. It wasn't the usual sterile quiet of a morgue. It was heavy, filled with tension, a kind of fear that I couldn't ignore. I felt like I had entered the lion's den, and I wasn't sure if I was going to make it out alive, much less intact. As they began the process of preparing the body, I stood frozen. Something inside me screamed at me to walk away, to pretend I hadn't seen anything, but my feet stayed planted. I had to know. The anticipation clawed at my chest and I couldn't look away. It was then that I realized I was in over my head. What I was about to witness, what I was about to uncover, was something I never thought possible. And it was just the beginning. The gurney rolled in, and the room seemed to hold its breath as the attendants carefully wheeled Prince's body into place. The thick cloth draped over him looked almost too heavy, as if trying to weigh down whatever secret was buried beneath it. As the team began to position the body on the table, I felt the weight of the moment settle in. The room, previously filled with quiet conversation and routine tasks, now felt suffocatingly still. Everyone in the room knew this was different, but no one dared say it out loud. The way they moved with him, slow, deliberate, made the unease in the air thick and palpable. The usual banter was absent. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something about the way they handled the body made me feel like I wasn't supposed to be there. The reverence wasn't just out of respect for the deceased. It was something more. Something hidden. It wasn't long before I started to notice the little things that made this feel like a surreal dream. The way they gently unwrapped the cloth, as though unveiling something precious. Their movements were synchronized, almost rehearsed. And then, as they uncovered his face, time seemed to stop altogether. There was no gasp, no shock, just a strange silence. I instinctively moved my eyes toward his chest, expecting the usual signs of trauma. But what I saw made my heart skip a beat. The stillness didn't match the man I had known through his music. His body looked lifeless, yet strangely preserved. The skin was too smooth, too perfect. It was as if death hadn't left its usual marks. As I stared at his face, I felt an unease crawl over me, more like a warning than fear. But no one else seemed to notice. The team was too busy preparing for the examination, oblivious to the creeping sensation gnawing at me. I couldn't understand why I felt this way. Maybe it was the magnitude of who he was, the weight of dealing with someone who had been adored worldwide. What unsettled me more was the way the team spoke to each other in hushed tones, avoiding my gaze. It felt like they were hiding something. My mind raced with possibilities. Was this normal? Was it just because of his celebrity status? Or was there something about this case that was being kept from me? The body lay motionless before me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was as if the space around us had contracted, as though the walls were closing in. I could almost hear the echo of my own breathing in the stillness. I reached for my gloves, trying to push the unsettling thoughts away, but my hands trembled. I had seen bodies before, bodies unrecognizable or ravaged by trauma, but none had affected me this way. There was something profoundly different about this. I had to focus. I had to do my job. But as I started to check for signs of injury, the feeling of unease didn't leave. Something was being concealed. Something massive. I was too small to understand it. One of the senior technicians, a man who had been doing this longer than me, came over to inspect the body. His hands were steady, but his eyes betrayed something different. There was a flicker of something in them. Recognition, fear. But it disappeared as quickly as it appeared. He looked away almost nervously, nodding for me to continue. The situation felt like a performance. Every move was scripted, rehearsed. No one was speaking, but I could feel the weight of unspoken words pressing down on me. I wanted to ask why they were acting this way, but the words wouldn't come. What happened next is still a blur. The sound of equipment being moved, the flickering lights. And then my hands started to shake as I reached for the next tool. It was then that I noticed something that made my stomach twist. A mark on his wrist. Not a tattoo, not a bruise. Something different. A symbol. It was faint at first, but as I moved closer, I could see it clearly. The mark wasn't natural. It looked like it had been added after death, subtle but unmistakable. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at it. What did it mean? And then, the realization hit me like a punch. This wasn't just about an accidental death. This was deliberate. Someone had made sure no one would ever discover this. And I was the only one who had seen it. The only one who knew. And that's when it dawned on me. This was just the beginning. There's something unnerving about silence in a place like this. A morgue is always quiet, but this was different. It wasn't the typical calm that accompanies the absence of life. It was too still, like the whole room was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The usual hum of activity, the low buzz of fluorescent lights above us, was almost drowned out by the weight of the moment. It felt like time itself had slowed down, and for the first time, I found myself nervous in a way I couldn't explain. The team moved with a practiced grace as they prepared the body for examination. Yet despite their efficiency, I noticed a hesitance, an unease in their movements that wasn't normally there. Even the senior technician, a man who had seen countless bodies in his career, seemed off. His hands were steady, but his eyes kept darting around the room as if expecting someone or something to interrupt. It wasn't the normal disinterest that comes with years of handling death. It was something more raw. As I stood there, trying to keep my composure, I felt the strangest sensation. Like I was an outsider in a room full of people who knew more than they were letting on. But nobody spoke. There were no casual words exchanged, no whispers of the usual gossip that would have otherwise made the job feel like just another night. It was almost as if they were all part of an unspoken agreement, some shared understanding that made me feel like I was intruding on something bigger than myself. What struck me the most was the calm, the complete absence of the usual rush to get the job done. The body lay there, still and cold, while the team went about their work with a careful deliberation I had never seen before. In the back of my mind, I kept hearing a warning bell ring, but I couldn't pinpoint what it was. It was like something important was lurking beneath the surface, something that no one dared speak about. I moved closer to the table where Prince's body lay, my gloved hands shaking as I prepared to do my part. I had never felt this way before. Like the weight of the situation was more than I could bear. My body was telling me to run, to walk out of the room and pretend I hadn't seen any of this, but my feet stayed rooted to the spot. I had to know what was going on. I had to see for myself. But as I leaned in, a strange thing happened. I looked down at the body, and for a split second, it felt like the air had thickened, like I was being suffocated by something I couldn't understand. There was a stillness in the room that went beyond the absence of life. It was as if everything was suspended in time, waiting for something that hadn't arrived yet. There was no urgency, no panic, just calm. But it wasn't a relaxed calm. It was more like the kind of calm you feel right before the storm hits. The kind of calm that's so tense. You know, something big is coming, but you don't know what. I couldn't help but glance at the faces of the others as I worked. Everyone's eyes were glued to their task, but there was a shared tension between them. They didn't look at me directly. Instead, they looked past me, as if I wasn't even there. They moved as if they were afraid to disturb something or someone. It was the oddest feeling. I had been in this room 1,000 times before, but tonight felt like a world away from anything I had ever known. There was something in the air that I couldn't touch, but I could feel it tugging at me, pulling me deeper into whatever mystery was unfolding before me. I moved over to the head of the table, where they had uncovered Prince's face. There was something strangely serene about the way he looked, as if he were merely sleeping, untouched by the harshness of the world. Yet, in that serenity, there was something deeply unsettling. His face wasn't just calm, it was too calm. It was the face of a man who had been untouched by the brutal reality of death, like his body hadn't quite accepted the fact that life had slipped away from him. My eyes wandered over to the symbol I had seen earlier, the mark on his wrist. It was barely visible, hidden in the folds of skin, as if it had been placed there deliberately to be overlooked. I couldn't stop staring at it. The more I looked at it, the more it seemed to pulse with some sort of hidden energy. Something dark was connected to it, but I didn't know what. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, staring into a black void, knowing that if I took a step forward, I would fall, but not knowing if I'd ever be able to climb back up. The team didn't notice my hesitation. They were too busy going through the motions. But I could feel the sense of urgency growing in me, a deep-seated need to understand what was happening, what was being hidden from me. I had seen bodies before, many times, but this wasn't just another corpse. This was Prince, and something about this felt wrong. I could feel the tension in my chest, the suffocating weight of it, but there was nothing I could do. I was just a small part of this larger machine, doing what I was told, playing my part in a tragedy that was far bigger than me. And then, just as quickly as it had come, The calmness was shattered by a voice. One of the technicians, a young woman with a pale face, looked up from her task and met my eyes. There was something strange in her gaze, something I couldn't place, but I knew, in that instant, that she wasn't going to say anything. She wasn't going to break the silence, wasn't going to admit what was really happening here. "Keep working," she said softly, her voice almost too calm. "We're almost done." Her words were the final signal that everything was about to change, that the truth was about to be revealed. And with that, the world seemed to snap back into focus, the air thickening with a fear I couldn't explain. I turned my attention back to the body, my hands moving mechanically, but my mind was racing. What was happening? What was I missing? What weren't they telling me? But as I worked, one thought kept circling back to me. This was just the calm before the storm. I had no idea that the moment the zipper started to move would be the moment everything would change. The tension that had been mounting all night, the strange calm, the unspoken fear, finally exploded into a reality I couldn't escape. As the team prepared to uncover Prince's body fully, I stood there frozen for a moment, watching as the senior technician slowly unzipped the bag. The sound of the zipper pulling apart was far too loud in the quiet room, echoing through the still air like a warning. It was as though the entire universe held its breath, waiting for what would come next. It wasn't just the sound. It was the feeling that accompanied it. The way the world seemed to shift as the bag opened. The slow, deliberate movement of the zipper felt like it was tearing apart the very fabric of time itself. And in that moment, I knew everything was about to change. I tried to focus on the task at hand, on the body in front of me, but my mind was spinning. What was happening? What was I about to see? The closer we got to revealing the full body, the more something deep inside me screamed to look away. I couldn't. My hands refused to move, my body locked in place, as if something in me had already sensed the impending horror. And then, it happened. As the bag fully opened, I felt my chest tighten, my breath catching in my throat. The body before me was not what I expected. The stillness in the air thickened, and for a split second, I almost felt like I was suffocating. The body before me wasn't just lifeless, it was otherworldly. There was a kind of unnaturalness to it, a quality that didn't quite fit the world we knew. Prince's body looked untouched. His skin was too perfect, too smooth. It wasn't the pale, lifeless look of death. It was like something had been done to preserve it. His expression, too, serene, almost as if he were still alive. But there was something else that struck me even harder than the pristine appearance. He didn't look dead. Not in the way I knew death to look. His features were too calm, too still, too lifelike. I stepped closer, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. His eyes were closed, but his face didn't bear the marks of death. It was too calm, too smooth, and it was as if his soul had simply left him, leaving behind a shell that no longer resembled the vibrant, living man he had been. But there was something else, something I couldn't quite grasp yet. The strange mark I had seen earlier on his wrist was more prominent now. It stood out against the smoothness of his skin, as though it were a part of him, something deliberately placed there. I felt the urge to reach out and touch it, to confirm what I was seeing, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I was too afraid. What if I was wrong? What if it wasn't just a mark? What if it was something else? Something that no one was supposed to see? The room around me seemed to shrink as I stared at him. The lights above flickered slightly, casting strange shadows on the table. The tension that had been building was now almost unbearable. I could feel the air grow colder, heavier, and still, no one else spoke. No one even seemed to notice the overwhelming sense of dread that had settled into my chest. It was like everyone else was pretending that everything was normal, that this was just another case to be processed. But it wasn't. It couldn't be. The senior technician, who had been standing beside me, gave a slight nod, signaling that it was time to begin the examination. But even his calm demeanor did little to reassure me. I could see the way his hands shook, the way his eyes avoided mine, as if he were afraid of what we would find. What was he hiding? What did he know that I didn't? I tried to focus on the task at hand, checking for any signs of injury, any obvious cause of death. But every time my eyes wandered to Prince's face, to the perfect skin, to the strange mark, I felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat. This wasn't just a body. It was a mystery, a secret wrapped in flesh that no one was supposed to uncover. And here I was, standing at the center of it, unable to look away. I glanced over at the other technicians. Their movements were too synchronized, too rehearsed. No one was talking. No one was questioning anything. They were all pretending that everything was fine. But I knew better. I knew something was off. I could feel it in my bones, in the pit of my stomach. As the examination continued, I grew more and more uneasy. The longer I stood there, the more I realized that no one was asking the questions that needed to be asked. No one was addressing the elephant in the room, the question of how this man had ended up here in front of us, looking as though he had stepped out of a time capsule. But what really shook me to my core was the absence of something, someone who should have been there. Prince's face, so serene, almost had the look of someone who had been groomed for this moment. Groomed to appear perfect, untouched, like a puppet being prepped for a final performance. A final performance that would never come. It wasn't just his body that was strange. It was the whole situation. The way everyone around me acted, the way they avoided my gaze, the way the air felt so heavy with unspoken words. There was something going on here. Something that no one was willing to admit. But I was starting to realize I couldn't escape it. I took a deep breath and forced myself to move. The procedure had to continue. The body had to be examined. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from a routine autopsy. This was something much darker, something far more sinister. I didn't know what I was getting myself into, but I was already too deep to back out. The truth was waiting just beyond my reach, and I knew, somehow, that once I uncovered it, nothing would ever be the same. The room felt smaller as I stood there staring at the body. Despite everything, I had to keep going. It was my job. The examination had to continue. But the longer I looked at him, the less it felt like I was performing routine work. There was something about the way Prince's body lay there, unmoving, serene, that unsettled me to my core. I had seen death before, many times, but this wasn't just death. This was a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. I kept my gloves on, my hands trembling slightly as I ran them over the body, searching for any signs of injury. I had to be thorough. had to document everything just as I had been trained to do. But each time my hands touched his skin, it was like I was disturbing something that was never meant to be disturbed. As I moved to his chest, the most peculiar thing happened. The usual feeling of cold, the sensation of a body that had been left to rest, wasn't there. Instead, his skin felt almost warm. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. I pressed my hand against his chest again just to be sure, but the warmth persisted. It wasn't the kind of warmth that indicated life. It was like residual heat, the kind you feel when something has been sitting in the sun too long. It didn't make sense. This man had been dead for hours. At least that was the official story. Yet here I was, feeling warmth emanating from his body as if he were still alive. I tried to ignore it, tried to push the thought from my mind, but it kept nagging at me. This wasn't right. It wasn't normal. But what could I do? I wasn't the one making the calls. I was just here to do my job. My eyes shifted back to the mark on his wrist. The symbol I had seen earlier, faint and almost invisible beneath his skin, seemed to stand out even more now. As I got closer, I could make out the shape more clearly. It wasn't just a random tattoo or a scar from some accident. It was deliberate, almost like it had been branded into his skin. I could feel my pulse quicken as I leaned in for a closer look. The symbol was faint, but it wasn't subtle. It looked too precise, too purposeful to be accidental. I reached out, my fingers trembling slightly as I touched the mark. My stomach lurched as the strange sensation hit me. There was something about it, something beyond the physicality of the mark itself. It felt like it was alive, like it had a presence of its own, something that extended beyond the body. The feeling was unsettling, as though I was touching something that wasn't meant for mortal hands. I quickly pulled my fingers away as though I had just touched fire. The room around me seemed to tilt for a moment, the weight of everything crashing down. How could something like this be real? This wasn't just a body. It was too perfect, too orchestrated. And the mark on his wrist, it wasn't just some personal symbol. I realized that I didn't just feel the weight of it. I could sense it in the air around me. Whatever that symbol meant, it was tied to something far darker than I could ever imagine. I stepped back, trying to shake the thoughts from my mind. I had to stay focused. I had to finish the job. I glanced around the room, but no one was paying attention to me. They were all absorbed in their tasks, not looking at Prince the way I was. It was like they couldn't see it. The strangeness that was slowly eating at me. The feeling that everything I knew about the world was about to be turned upside down. But as I took a deep breath and returned my attention to the body, I noticed something else, a detail that had been almost invisible before, hidden under the folds of his clothing. It wasn't just the mark. It was something else, a small object tucked carefully into the folds of his jacket. Without thinking, I reached for it, my hands moving with an urgency I couldn't control. The object felt cool to the touch, its surface smooth and solid. It was small, about the size of a coin, and when I held it up to the light, I saw that it was made of metal. But it wasn't just any piece of metal. It was intricately engraved, its surface covered in a series of symbols I couldn't read, symbols I didn't recognize. The engraving was precise, meticulous, and it seemed to pulse with an energy that was almost alive. The moment my fingers closed around it, the air around me shifted. I could feel a cold chill run down my spine, a wave of nausea sweeping through me. It wasn't just an object. It felt like a message. But from who? And why was it hidden here in Prince's jacket of all places? What was the point of hiding it? What did it mean? My mind raced with questions, but I couldn't answer any of them. All I knew was that I was holding something that was never supposed to be found. I could feel the weight of the secret in my palm, and I knew, deep down, that I had just crossed a line. There was no going back from this. What I had uncovered, what I was now holding in my hand, was part of something far bigger than anything I had ever imagined. I tried to pull myself together, but I couldn't. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my breath shallow and quick. Every part of me wanted to run, to throw the object back into the jacket and pretend none of this had happened. But I couldn't. I couldn't unsee what I had already seen. Couldn't unfeel the weight of the secret that was now in my possession. I glanced at the others, but they were still oblivious to what was happening. They were too caught up in their work, too focused on the body in front of them. It was as if they couldn't see what I was seeing, couldn't feel what I was feeling. I turned the object over in my hand, trying to make sense of it. The symbols on its surface seemed to shimmer, almost like they were moving, shifting with a life of their own. I had no idea what it meant, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just about Prince's death anymore. It never had been. There was something deeper at play, something hidden from the world. But what? And who was behind it? The weight of what I was holding in my hand was unbearable. The object I had found on Prince's body, no, not just an object, it was a message. Felt as though it was pulsing with a dark energy I couldn't comprehend. Every time I looked at it, I could feel my pulse quicken, the air around me growing heavier. The symbols on its surface twisted and turned in my mind, like they were alive, whispering a language I didn't understand. I had crossed a line. There was no denying it now. The moment I touched that object, the moment I saw the mark on his wrist, I became part of something I wasn't ready for, something I couldn't control. I was no longer just an observer. I was a participant in a story that was far darker than anything I had ever imagined. But what could I do? I was a nobody in a morgue, just a faceless worker who processed bodies. Who would believe me? Even if I told someone, who would listen? What would they think? I was just a witness to a conspiracy that, frankly, I didn't understand, but felt deep in my gut that had the power to destroy everything I knew. There were people far more powerful than me involved in this. People who could make sure I disappeared if I spoke out. I had seen enough to know how things like this worked. My hands were still trembling as I placed the object back inside the folds of his jacket. I couldn't leave it out in the open. Not yet. Not until I understood what it meant. It felt like the room was closing in around me, and I had no way out. The silence was suffocating, and the weight of my decision grew heavier with each passing second. I had to decide. Was I going to speak out and risk everything, or was I going to bury the truth and pretend none of this had ever happened? I glanced around at the others in the room, my colleagues who were still absorbed in their work. They had no idea what I had uncovered. They were still following the routine, still carrying on as though nothing was wrong. But I knew. I knew that what I had seen, what I had felt, was not normal. It was not right. This wasn't just an autopsy anymore. It was a cover-up. And I was right in the middle of it, caught between a moral responsibility to speak the truth and the overwhelming fear of what would happen if I did. I could hear the sound of the equipment being set up, the quiet shuffle of feet. The team was busy with their tasks, oblivious to the chaos that was now swirling inside of me, but I wasn't focused on them. My mind was racing, torn between two choices: keep quiet and protect myself, or risk it all and expose what I knew. But as I stood there, staring at Prince's body, at the body of a man who had once been the epitome of life, energy, and mystery, something inside me broke. I had spent my entire life believing in the stories, the legends, the mystique of icons like Prince. I had believed in their perfection, in the way they transcended the ordinary world. But what I had seen that night, what I had uncovered, shattered that belief. The truth about him, about everything, was not what the world had been told, and I couldn't ignore it. The problem wasn't just that I knew the truth. It was that the truth was too big for me to handle. I had no answers. I couldn't explain what was happening, what I had uncovered. All I knew was that if I spoke up, everything would fall apart. I wasn't equipped to handle the consequences of blowing the lid off this. No one would believe me anyway. They'd call me crazy. They'd dismiss me as just another person trying to make a name for themselves by exploiting a tragedy. I ran my hands over my face, trying to calm the storm that was raging inside me. I needed to think. I needed to clear my head. But the more I tried to push the thoughts away, the more they returned. The mark, the object, the fear. Every part of me screamed to stay quiet. Every part of me told me that the safest choice, the only choice, was to bury the truth. Let it stay hidden. Keep my head down. Stay anonymous. But there was a part of me, a part I couldn't ignore, that wanted to expose the truth. I wanted to rip the veil off this entire conspiracy and show the world what had been hidden. But the consequences were too high. I had seen too much to remain silent, but I also knew the risks. Speaking out would put everything I had worked for on the line. It would destroy me. The system, the people behind all of this, would make sure of it. No one was ever supposed to know what I knew. I was never supposed to have seen what I had seen. And yet, as I look back at Prince's body, at the strange, unsettling calm that surrounded him, I realized that I was already in too deep. I had already crossed the point of no return. There was no walking away from this. The truth was too dangerous to be left alone. But there was still time. Time to walk away. Time to erase this moment from my mind. If I kept quiet, if I kept my mouth shut, no one would ever know the truth. I could leave this behind, go back to my normal life and pretend that none of it had happened. It could all be forgotten, buried with Prince. But deep down, I knew I couldn't. I couldn't live with the guilt of knowing something that could change everything and doing nothing about it. So, I made my decision. The truth couldn't stay buried forever. And whether I was ready for it or not, I had to speak out. I had to tell someone. But the fear was still there, gnawing at the back of my mind. What would happen if I did? Would they silence me? Would I even be allowed to speak the truth? And if I did, would anyone believe me? I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and realized there was no turning back now. The decision was made. The truth would come out, whether I liked it or not. The silence after my decision to stay quiet was suffocating. At first, it felt like relief, like I had made the safe choice. I could keep living my life without facing the consequences of what I knew. But that relief didn't last. The first few weeks were the hardest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, the body, the mark, the object. The things I wasn't supposed to know haunted me. I told myself staying silent was the right choice. No one would believe me anyway. I was just a nobody. But the guilt never went away. It gnawed at me, eating away at my insides, making it harder to breathe every day. The truth followed me, lurking like a shadow. Every headline about Prince's death, every mention of his name, made the weight of the lie unbearable. The world had been fed a story I knew was false. I was trapped, knowing the truth but too afraid to speak it. The years that followed only made it worse. The truth wasn't something you could ignore forever. It became like a virus, infecting every part of me. I withdrew from everyone. I didn't want to be around anyone who could see through my facade. The nightmares grew worse. I dreamt of the morgue, of Prince's body, the mark on his wrist, and woke up drenched in sweat, heart pounding. I couldn't escape the truth. Time passed, but the guilt remained. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had failed him, that I had betrayed his memory by staying silent. Every time I heard his music, it stung. I became obsessed with the fear of being exposed. What if someone found out? Would they believe me? I couldn't trust anyone. I had made sure of that. The world moved on. New celebrities, new scandals. But I was stuck in the past, trapped by the secret I carried. I couldn't move on. I kept telling myself it didn't matter, that I had done the right thing. But deep down, I knew it wasn't true. The silence became its own prison. I had locked myself in with the secret, and the only way out was to tell the truth. But every time I considered speaking up, fear gripped me again. And so, I waited. I waited for the right moment, knowing deep down the truth would never come out unless I broke it. Trapped by my own silence, I began to wonder, would I ever be free? Final payoff. I can't keep this secret anymore. The truth is too much to carry. What I saw, what I uncovered that night, it wasn't just a mystery. It was a lie. A conspiracy so deep that it would change everything. Prince wasn't just another victim of fame. He was silenced, controlled, a piece in a game much bigger than anyone could imagine. That mark, that object, they weren't just symbols. They were messages. Messages from someone who wanted to keep the truth buried forever. But I can't stay silent. I can't live with this guilt any longer. The world deserves to know what I saw. Even if it destroys everything, even if it costs me everything, because the truth, it's ugly, it's terrifying, and it changes everything. But it can't stay hidden. Not anymore.